the slave forts of West Africa, Elmina, Goree, and Cape Coast. Do you know that some of the most powerful remnants of Africa's tumultuous history are etched in the stone walls of ancient slave forts along its western coastline? These fortresses, Elmina, Goree, and Cape Coast, are silent witnesses to one of humanity's darkest chapters. For over 3 centuries, these sites served as the epicenters of an inhumane system that displaced millions of Africans, stripped them of their dignity, and thrust them into unimaginable suffering. Today, we journey through their chilling history to unearth the untold stories that lie within these fortifications. Stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold to learn more about these historical narratives that shape our collective memory. To understand the history of the slave forts, we must first explore the European arrival on the West African coast in the late 15th century. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to land, led by explorers like Diogo de Azambuja, who arrived in 1482. They built Elmina Castle, the first European settlement in sub-Saharan Africa. Elmina, meaning the mine, was initially established to control the lucrative gold trade. However, as European demand for labor grew in the Americas, this structure became central to the trade of human lives. By the 17th century, other European powers, including the Dutch, British, French, and Danes, entered the region, each vying for control over this profitable trade. They constructed or commandeered forts, turning them into bustling hubs of commerce where goods such as firearms, textiles, and liquor were exchanged for enslaved Africans. Elmina Castle, the first of its kind. Elmina Castle, located in modern-day Ghana, holds the harrowing distinction of being the first European slave trading post in Africa. What began as a gold trade hub rapidly transitioned into a human trafficking depot. As the demand for enslaved Africans skyrocketed, Elmina became a cornerstone of the transatlantic slave trade. Inside the castle, there were 2 starkly different worlds. The European merchants and governors lived in opulence, dining on fine meals and enjoying sea breezes in lavish quarters. Below them, the enslaved Africans endured unimaginable horrors. Men, women, and children were crammed into dark, airless dungeons, shackled together in their own waste. These dungeons were built to hold a few hundred people, but often imprisoned over 1,000, resulting in diseases and deaths. One of the most heart-wrenching elements of Elmina is the door of no return. This infamous doorway led directly to waiting slave ships, marking the final moments the captives would see of their homeland. As they passed through this door, they were stripped of their identity, culture, and freedom. Gory Island, a monument to human suffering. Moving along the coast, we find the island of Goree, off the shores of modern-day Senegal. Gory Island became one of the most significant slave trading centers in West Africa, controlled at different times by the Portuguese, Dutch, British, and French. Its strategic location made it a prime spot for the trafficking of enslaved Africans. The House of Slaves, Maison des Esclaves, is the most iconic structure on Gory Island. Built in 1776 by the French, it stands as a chilling reminder of the atrocities of the slave trade. Similar to Elmina, the building contained separate dungeons for men, women, and children. The enslaved were branded, chained, and held in inhumane conditions as they awaited transportation across the Atlantic. The door of no return on Gory Island has become a symbol of loss and resilience. It faces the Atlantic Ocean, offering a haunting view of the horizon that millions of Africans were forced to cross. Though some historians debate the scale of the slave trade conducted specifically at Goree, its symbolic significance as a site of collective memory cannot be overstated. Cape Coast Castle, a British stronghold. Further along the coast of Ghana stands Cape Coast Castle, another notorious slave fort. Initially built by the Swedes in 1653 as a trade lodge, it was later expanded by the British into a massive fortress. Under British control, Cape Coast Castle became one of the largest slave trading posts in West Africa. The castle's architecture tells a story of stark contrasts. Above ground, British officers enjoyed a life of privilege. Beneath them, enslaved Africans suffered in squalor. The dungeons were overcrowded, dark and suffocating, with no sanitation facilities. Prisoners often spent weeks or months in these conditions before being forced onto ships. Cape Coast Castle also had a chapel directly above the male dungeons. This juxtaposition of worship and cruelty epitomizes the hypocrisy of the European powers, who justified their actions under the guise of spreading Christianity. One of the most chilling features of Cape Coast Castle is its punishment cell. Those who resisted or tried to escape were locked in this small, windowless room with no ventilation or light. Many did not survive their imprisonment here, and their bodies were unceremoniously discarded. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, it is estimated that 12 to 15 million Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic. For every individual who survived the Middle Passage, many more perished in the raids, marches to the coast, or while awaiting shipment in the forts. The conditions within the forts were a microcosm of the larger inhumanity of the slave trade. These forts were not just physical structures. They were mechanisms of dehumanization. Families were torn apart, cultures were eroded, and entire communities were decimated. The psychological trauma inflicted by the slave trade continues to reverberate through generations. Resistance and survival. Amidst the despair, there were acts of resistance and resilience. Enslaved Africans often rebelled against their captors, with some managing to escape. Others resisted through subtle acts of defiance, such as refusing to eat or sabotaging equipment. Stories of survival and endurance are woven into the history of these forts, highlighting the indomitable spirit of those who endured these atrocities. The forts also became centers of African resistance during the decline of the slave trade. Local leaders, such as the Asante and Fante in Ghana, sometimes resisted European incursions and fought to protect their sovereignty. However, the dynamics were complex, as some African leaders participated in the trade, either through coercion or as a means of consolidating power. Today, Elmina Castle, Gory Island and Cape Coast Castle are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. They serve as powerful reminders of the transatlantic slave trade and its enduring impact. Visitors from around the world, including descendants of enslaved Africans, come to these sites to honor their ancestors and confront the painful truths of history. Educational programs and memorials at these sites aim to preserve their legacy while fostering dialogue about the lingering effects of slavery. The forts have become places of reflection and healing, where the descendants of both the enslaved and the enslavers can confront a shared past. The slave forts of West Africa are more than historical landmarks. They are symbols of resilience and a call to action. They remind us of the depths of human cruelty, but also the strength of the human spirit. Their walls echo with stories of pain, but also of survival and resistance. The legacy of the transatlantic slave trade continues to shape the world we live in today. The African diaspora, spread across the Americas, Europe and beyond, carries with it the cultural, spiritual and historical roots of their ancestors. The forts stand as a testament to their journey, urging us to learn from the past and work towards a more just and equitable future. As we reflect on the history of Elmina, Goree and Cape Coast, let us remember that these stories are not just African history, they are global history. The transatlantic slave trade connected continents in a web of exploitation and suffering, leaving an indelible mark on humanity. If you found this journey through history compelling, subscribe to Black Stories Untold and join us in uncovering more stories that deserve to be remembered. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from, and share this video to help others learn about the hidden truths of our shared past. Thank you for being part of this journey of remembrance and education. Together, we can honor the resilience of those who came before us.